Welcome to Marietta House Museum. My name is Julie Rose, and I'm the Historic House Museum Manager here at the museum, and we're delighted to have you here.
And I'm Stephanie Sperling. I'm the senior archaeologist.
So many of our visitors are asking, who lived here? Who was enslaved here? And who was able to pursue their liberty? And hopefully today on our tour together, we'll be able to answer some of those questions. Marietta was built around 1813, likely by enslaved laborers for U.S. Supreme Court Judge Gabriel Duvall and his family who enslaved them. Since as early as 1783, enslaved men, women, and children cultivated tobacco for 3 generations of Duvall families and waited on the Duvalls until January 1865, when Maryland abolished slavery. In any given year, between 9 and 40 enslaved people were here. Fingerprints in the brick walls attest to their presence. And yet, Judge Duvall defended over 120 freedom petitions in Maryland courts for slaves of other enslavers and won many suits. The moral right, he said, in Queen versus Hepburn in the U.S. Supreme Court, he wrote, "It will be universally admitted that the right to freedom is more important than the right of property." The natural right to defend oneself in court of law was one of the few legal avenues to citizenship for slaves in the United States. U.S. laws were largely based on British law books that stated, "Pure and proper slavery does not, nay, cannot, subsist in England, and indeed it is repugnant to reason," and the principles of natural law that such a state should subsist anywhere. Duvall associated himself with other slaveholder lawyers in Annapolis, Maryland, to secure the freedom of hundreds of men, women, and children as he prepared himself for a life in state and national judicial acclaim. He was appointed by President James Madison to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1811, the same year enslaved laborers completed this one-room, 2-story law office at Marietta. Whose voices from Marietta, however, have not been given national acclaim or have been heard. Consider one family story of likely 20 different enslaved families from Marietta. The Butler family was enslaved here as early as 1805. Thomas and Sarah Butler and only their toddler daughter Sally were purchased by Gabriel Duvall to work at Marietta House before it was even built. They lost their 2 older daughters at the D.C. auction block a few years before. Thomas and Sarah likely labored in the fields on the 700-acre plantation. In time, Thomas and Sarah's family grew to include 4 more children and 2 grandchildren. In these basement spaces inside Marietta, we can still see the workspaces where enslaved house servants ate and slept. Maria was an enslaved cook until her death at Marietta in 1836. The Butlers likely knew Maria. She was considered a house servant, while the Butlers were likely referred to as field slaves. Their children were born into slavery and by age 8 or 9 were put to work churning butter, hauling water, tending fires, cleaning chamber pots, helping in the fields, especially at harvest time. This is a yoke, right? So that a person would put this on their shoulders, and then the buckets of water would be attached to this. So this is an interesting piece to look at and to kind of consider what hard work it was to carry that heavy load of water more than one time a day, multiple times in a day. We're right below the foyer where there was a staircase coming down here,
Okay.
right from the dining room. That archaeological pit that I talked about earlier, where we found peach pits and we found
Oh, that was here.
fish scales, was much of it was found right here.
Okay.
This was a food prep and food that was taken up. It was cooked inside, of course, obviously, but it was prepped out here, even plated here, and then was brought upstairs. And the stairs were right here. The Butlers likely lived in slave quarters right around this spot in a multi-family structure with roughly 15 other enslaved people. In 1828, 23 years since arriving at Marietta, Thomas Butler believed his family could win their freedom through the courts. He gathered information and knowledge to secure a lawyer and made it with Sarah to D.C. to file a freedom petition for themselves, their 5 children, 2 grandchildren, and a relative. Gabriel Duvall defended himself in the Butler suit, claiming them his slaves for life. The case took 3 years and tens of witnesses to affirm that the Butler family was illegally purchased in D.C. to labor as slaves in Maryland for Duvall. Thomas and Sarah and their family were freed by the courts in 1831. Petitioning for freedom in the courts was one way to seek freedom. Fleeing, sometimes called running away, was another, though an extremely dangerous way to pursue freedom. Joe Jackson fled Marietta in 1837 and headed to one of his 2 brothers seeking refuge, one brother living at Free in Baltimore, the other in Frederick. After Judge Duvall died in 1844, his grandson Edmund Duvall and his wife Caroline moved into Marietta, where they raised 11 children and had tens of enslaved men, women, and children. Edmund Duvall sold Benjamin Duckett, who was likely born at Marietta. Benjamin was a young man when he was severed from his family at Marietta to Belmont Plantation, where he experienced such cruelty from his enslaver, Zechariah Berry Jr., that Ben fled to Philadelphia. There he told his story to William Still with the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. Still gave Benjamin money to help him travel further north. Berry advertised for Benjamin Bucket for 5 years right up to the Civil War. Rachel was the enslaved nursemaid for Gabriel Duvall's granddaughter, Gabriella. For 2 years, Rachel cared for the toddler until Rachel had her daughter Emily in 1840. She was removed from working inside Marietta's big house and assigned to other work. In 1842, Rachel and Emily's names no longer appear in any of the known records. Did they flee, petition for freedom, or did someone else decide that they should be removed from Marietta? Echoes of the Enslaved 2021 is a conversation about enslaved people pursuing liberty during extremely dangerous and oppressive times. Finding routes to obtain freedom came at unique times and daring opportunities. Join Prince George's County Parks and Recreation Archaeology Department, Marietta House Museum, Joe McGill's Slave Dwelling Project, historian Dr. Will Thomas, and Mayor Dennis Smith to discuss who took the risks to flee, who was favored by an enslaver to be manumitted by last will, who completed an indenture, who collected legal acumen to petition for freedom in court. Let's listen for the echoes of the enslaved.
I am so excited that we are bringing the 3rd annual Echoes of the Enslaved here to Marietta on September 10th and 11th, 2021. Thank you so much for hosting. There's going to be lots of great activities, some in person, some virtual. So keep checking pgparks.com for more information.